Hello and welcome to Merlin's Manor. Today I'm going to give my thoughts on Isle of Cats Duel, which is a two-player head-to-head version of Isle of Cats designed by Frank West. Isle of Cats is a polyomino tile placement game, which is one of my favorite board games. So how does the two-player version hold up? How does it play differently? Is it worth having both the dual version and the standard version of Isle of Cats? Before we get into my thoughts on the game and answer some of these questions, I'm going to give a brief gameplay overview. Now, in Isle of Cats, you are trying to fill up your boat with cats as you rescue them from an island over the course of 4 rounds. You'll take turns drafting cats and cards from a shared board by moving the Oshak's cat 2 spaces and then taking one of the items that the cat touched, either the starting position, the ending position, or the one passed over. If you took a cat, then you place it on your boat. First one can go anywhere, and the rest must be connected to something that you've already placed on your boat. You took a lesson card, then you place it next to your board, and it will potentially score points at the end of the game. If you take a treasure card, you immediately take 2 treasures and place them anywhere on your board next to something you have already placed. If you take an immediate action purple card, you immediately carry out the instructions of the card. When placing a cat on the board, if you cover up one of these treasure icons with a cat that's the same color as the map that you covered up, then you gain 1 treasure and place it. You start the game with 3 fish and can gain some either from purple cards or cats with a fish icon on them. In this game, fish are not used the same way as in the standard Isle of Cats, but instead, you use fish to perform special actions. You can spend 1 fish to move the Oshaks an extra space, 2 fish to jump to any location on the board, 2 fish to gain any treasure, or 3 fish to gain 2 items when moving the Oshaks. A round ends when all of the items from the board have been taken or both players take consecutive turns without collecting anything from the board. The player that went second in the round places one of the 3 cats that were set aside at the start of the game into the bag. This acts as the round tracker. And then they take the first turn after refilling the board with new cats and new cards. At the end of 4 rounds, you'll count up points to see who wins the game. You score points for cats families of 3 or more of the same color cat that form a group on your boat. You score points for lesson cards, and you'll lose 1 point per uncovered rat and lose 5 points for each unfilled room, including the large room on the boat. The player with the most points wins the game. Now let's get into the game review, starting with art and components. Just like in Isle of Cats, the game has high quality cardboard polyomino pieces with great artwork of fantastical cats on them and treasure tiles. The central board and player boards are high quality as well. The main board has the same artwork and setup on both sides, which seems unnecessary or potentially a wasted opportunity for an alternative setup. The player boards themselves are dual sided with different boats on each side, giving some variability. Both player boards have the exact same setup, giving a little less variability than the standard Isle of Cats, which changed up where rats and treasures were located on the various boards, instead yielding parity between the 2 boards. Players can choose to play with the same boats as each other or the different boats. It is nice that the game comes with 2 different boat setups for variability, whereas the original Isle of Cats just had the same basic setup with different icons on the various boats until they added the boat pack. Cards for the game are small mini Euro cards, which helps them fit on the board, but which tend to take on more wear and tear when riffle shuffling. So I decided to immediately sleeve my cards in order to protect them. The cards are a good quality linen finish, so they will hold up well overall. I just find the size of card to bend more easily from riffle shuffling than larger size cards, but I haven't personally tested that with these cards since I immediately sleeved them to protect them. The game also comes with a nice cloth bag for pulling out cats at random, cardboard fish tokens, a nice wooden Oshak's cat figure, a pencil, and a score pad. There's not as much in the way of cards as standard Isle of Cats, but the pieces are on par with the original Isle of Cats, which is a good thing. Now let's get into ease of play. This game has a level of complexity that falls between family mode of Isle of Cats and standard mode of Isle of Cats, and closer to the level of complexity of the family mode, which means it's a fairly easy game to learn. This game does not have the complexity involved in the original Isle of Cats found in the drafting of cards and paying fish for cards and rescuing cats, getting basket cards, and so on. The drafting mechanic of moving and taking an item is simple to learn, and there's a key on the player board that helps you remember what the different actions that you can spend fish to do are. So it's much simpler use of fish in this version. Overall, the game is more streamlined, which makes it pretty easy to learn. If you're already familiar with Isle of Cats, learning the differences is super easy. Now let's get into the gameplay itself. The gameplay includes the same main mechanism of placing cats on boats to score points and filling rooms that I found satisfying in the original Isle of Cats, and it streamlines things a bit to make for a fast setup and simpler play. The game feels a bit more interactive and head to head thanks to the player board in the middle and moving that cat figure to draft cards and cats. Players sometimes need to consider where the other player will be able to reach if they move to a certain place to guide decisions when moving the Oshaks, especially as you consider multiple cards or cats that you want to focus on getting. You can also find yourself drafting lessons that you can't use to keep the other player from scoring points. Also, towards the end of a round, a potential strategy is to move the Oshaks out of range of items to keep the other player from getting an item or force them to use fish to get an item. The use of fish in this game provides an added level of strategy where you consider if it's worth using a fish in the moment to move further or just take what is in range, and especially if it's worth spending 3 fish to get 2 items instead of one, if there are 2 items that you really want within the 2 movement range. And being able to spend 2 fish to buy a treasure can be super helpful towards the end of the game to fill small gaps when other ways to get treasure are no longer in play. Although the number of treasures are limited, so that is something to consider towards the end of the game. If you really need a 2x1 treasure and there's only one left, you might want to spend those 2 fish sooner rather than later. This game does lose some of the more complex strategy from the original game, found in balancing fish both for buying cards and gaining cats, as well as the strategy involved in getting baskets in the original game. Overall, I do prefer the gameplay in the original Isle of Cats to the Isle of Cats Duel, even at the 2 player count, but this version does provide a quicker, more streamlined version that's easier to get to the table and does provide some alternate strategies which will work well to make this game feel a little more head to head. There are definitely some interesting innovations in the gameplay to provide a different experience that mixes things up a bit. Now let's talk about replayability. I feel like the replayability is a bit less for this game compared to the original Isle of Cats, and that is mainly because there are much fewer cards in this game. The original Isle of Cats came with a few lesson modules, and there are more expansions that you can mix in. Plus, there are quite a few more purple play for immediate effect cards. This game also lacks Oshak's cats and rare treasures, which provided an added variety for standard Isle of Cats. The game, coming with 2 different models of boats, does add some replayability, plus the general randomness of what cats will come out and in which order, plus which cards will come out each game does provide a decent amount of replayability, but overall, much more modest replayability compared to the original Isle of Cats. On the other hand, the small size and quick setup and quicker playtime does make this a game that is easier to bring when traveling and might get to the table at times when you don't feel like bringing out the larger game. This game has a modest amount of replayability as far as I can tell at this point. Now let's talk about theme for a moment. The theme of this game is a fun one as you are trying to save cats from the evil Lord Vesh, but you only have so much room on your boat as well as only so much time to rescue cats. The theme does not come through quite as much in this version as the original, as you are not luring them in with fish and capturing them with baskets. I'm not quite sure how spending a fish fits thematically in this version, but it does work well mechanically, so I'm not going to nitpick too much on theme here. So let's get into my final thoughts. Overall, I enjoy this addition to the Isle of Cats family of games. While the OG Isle of Cats gets a 10 out of 10 for me, this one here sits at a 9 out of 10. The benefits of this version include being more streamlined and easier to get to the table because it is a quicker to set up and play game, and that it's easier to take on trips because it's a little bit smaller. It's also nice to have some alternative strategies to focus on to change things up a bit, and the gameplay feels a little more interactive, which works well with the head to head nature of this game. The art and components are nice and on par with the original Isle of Cats. I do feel this game takes a hit on replayability with having only a handful of lesson cards and not as much variety when it comes to immediate effect cards. Even for playing 2 players, I will likely prefer the original version over this version, but the dual version will likely get pulled out on nights where I'm looking for a quicker game or don't have the energy for the full Isle of Cats game. Or take it on trips since it is smaller and easier to bring and play while on a trip. I can recommend this game as a 2 player introduction to the Isle of Cats. I can recommend it as a travel Isle of Cats for 2 players, and as a quicker Isle of Cats, or if you just like to experience a slightly different playstyle, similar to where one might buy an expansion to get a slightly different playstyle. Personally, I don't think this replaces the original Isle of Cats every time you want to play Isle of Cats at 2 players, as the original works well at 2 players as well and offers a deeper depth of strategy and complexity than this version, and still has far more replayability value. I still see this one as having a place if you really enjoy Isle of Cats, but it's not a must-have for playing it at 2 players. I hope you found this video helpful in determining if this is a game for you. I enjoy it very much personally. I encourage you to check out my old review of Isle of Cats or this video that YouTube recommends for you. I hope you have a great week and keep on gaming.